Chad, how are you?
Doing good, Neal. How's it going today?
Good. I'm actually pretty excited about today. We're about to have a lot of fun and let a lot of people in with our guest today.
Let's get started.
Let's do it. Here's the theme.
Recorded live from Louisville, it's Talk About Town, the Louisville podcast. And now, your hosts, Neal Chad and Chad Hennessy.
Hey, Ron White here. I'm nowhere to be found. You're listening to Talk About Town, like I give a...
All right. Today, it's Friday afternoon, and we've got in the studio Lacey Smith and Barbara Sexton-Smith, Louisville royalty. Am I allowed to say that?
Oh, for heaven's sake, that's April Fool's Day.
That's funny. No, I did a little bit of just, browsing the web about you earlier today, actually, and there was a quote that I had used recently about if you want something done, ask a busy person. And I read that right when I was reading about you, because you've got your hands in all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so I think it's really exciting. Neal, if you don't mind, Chad, roll
Please.
with me for just a moment here. So I want to tell folks right at the top of this show how it happened that Lacey and I are sitting in these chairs.
It's a funny story.
I know that you all are all thinking, oh, Lacey probably ran into Neal or Chad somewhere and convinced him to put him on the air so he could talk about street smart principled negotiation, which he is the world's leading specialist in that topic. No, all y'all listening. And by the way, y'all see these cameras? Chad and Neal have set 4 cameras up in the studio. If you don't see us, that's what's happening live. Anybody that's ever heard me on a radio or live streaming audio show, you know I always bring props to the station. Well, today, we really are going to get to see those props. So Lacey and I, on March 3rd, decided we would go out and start knocking doors in neighborhoods, and we started up in the Highlands to promote Craig Greenberg as our next mayor. I think folks know by now that I'm the chairwoman for that campaign. So we knock on this door, and Sarah's with us, and a young man answers, and Sarah, the young lady with us, and the guy at the door get so excited. They're hugging each other, they're smiling, they're laughing. Lacey said, "What's going on with that?" And it turns out it's Neal, who's a longtime, very close family friend of Sarah Ward. So we have this great conversation. I think, Neal, did we agree to put a yard sign in your yard that day? I can't remember.
I don't think I did, and the reason is because I have a public persona with business.
That's right.
And I try not to be abjectly political.
Right. Okay. So I knew there was something about that. Yard signs you sell in real estate. It made me think about it. So we thanked Neal, and we turned to walk away, and Neal says, "Hey, Barbara, one more thing." And I turned back and looked at the door, and all I could think of, you all, was it 2016 when Lacey and I were knocking doors for me running for Metro Council District 4. It turned out that every time I said goodbye and I turned to walk down a sidewalk, I turned back and I would go, "I love y'all." And I thought, if Neal is going to say that, I turned around and he said, "Hey, do you think you and Lacey would do a podcast with us?" And I said, "Of course. Hold on. Lacey's out on the sidewalk. Lacey, what do you remember saying that day when I said, we need to go do this podcast, and you said?
Do we have to?
It looks like you had to.
No, he loves this. And then he said to me, I got down on the main sidewalk with him, and Neal, he says to me, "What's a podcast?"
Oh, that's funny.
And I said, "Go with me and we'll see." So thanks for having us here, y'all.
Yeah.
We
We're
really
thrilled to
appreciate
have you
it.
both here.
Appreciate it very much.
It's a radio show that can be accessed at any time. How about that?
Right.
And then now they're venturing into video as well, and we're experimenting with today being the inaugural video event.
Good.
So
We're here
Well,
at the
that's
beginning.
fun. Lacey, I'm so glad you wore this OG suit. It's his original gangster suit.
Nice.
If you're not watching this online, you guys, he's got on this black. Is that chalk
Pinstripes?
stripe or pinstripe?
Well, I wore this. I'd like to say I wore it to come to be with you all, but actually I wore it because I had a date with this fabulous woman at lunch, and so I put on this suit, which I've had for a long time, and I don't wear suits all that much anymore. But Yeah, it is kind of it's a pinstripe. It looks a little bit like a gangster somewhere from Chicago or somewhere.
I think you look sharp, Lacey.
Well,
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, no one does the suit thing very much anymore. I mean, really, in general, it almost looks out of place when you know, if you go.
Now, if you,
Not you, but-
I'm still practicing law.
Yeah,
And so if I go into court,
Everybody's got a suit on.
I'll
Yes.
wear,
Yeah.
I'll dress up like this because you just have to.
Absolutely.
Most of the time when we're out knocking on doors, we're pretty casual.
I tell you, with my industry, it's turned very casual, especially post COVID. However, you dress a step up to who you're going to go visit. So depending on what my appointment is, if they're going to be wearing business casual, then I'll throw a jacket on. If I know that they're going to be in a coat and tie, then I'll throw a suit on. That's just kind of how we kind of roll. But a lot of times, if they're in jeans and a t-shirt, well, then I'll come in a golf shirt and jeans, and that's just probably okay too.
A lot of things have changed in the last, since I started practicing law. You wouldn't.
When did you start practicing law, Lacey?
Well, let me see if I can remember far back. I mean, it's been I graduated from law school in '66, so I've been practicing law for more than 50.
Where'd you graduate from?
I went to Harvard Law School.
Okay,
It's amazing.
Yeah, I grew up here in Louisville, grew up in Portland, the West End.
Mm-hmm.
My mom and dad got divorced when I was 5. My mom drove a checkered taxi cab, and I ran up and down the streets at night and got into more trouble than I should have. But eventually I went to Western Junior High School, and then went to a lot. My mother sent me around when she couldn't afford to keep me and my sister. She sent us around to live with relatives and friends. So I went to 13 different elementary schools.
Oh, goodness.
Oh wow.
Before I ended up at Eastern High School. Graduated from Eastern, and then I played a little basketball, and I got a basketball scholarship to go up to Minnesota to play basketball.
Oh, wow.
They thought I was a basketball player since I was from Kentucky.
Well,
Now,
of course.
we didn't have videos much back then, and so I went up there and proved them wrong. But, but nevertheless, I played up there for a while, and then I went on to graduate school at Princeton, and then from there I went to Harvard Law School, came back and became an assistant attorney general, and eventually ran for and got elected twice to the Kentucky State Senate. So I've got this political
amazing.
stuff in my blood. I'm sort of a recovering politician, and I haven't fully recovered. And so when the opportunity came for Barbara to run for council, I was like one of those horses at a firehouse. The bell rings and the horse starts pulling. And so when the opportunity came up, which Barbara will probably tell you about, it was purely accidental. I was all in. And so we've been on the council, and now we're in this campaign and trying to participate as much as we can.
And Barbara, since with the timeliness of it, tell us about what you are campaigning for right now, or who you're helping out.
Right. So right now we're in the midst of incredible local politics here in Louisville, Kentucky. And we also have, I think we have a race for Congress going on. And we also have some state rep races and Metro Council races. And you know what? I believe we're going to have the longest ballot in the history of Jefferson County. I've been told
gosh.
that.
Wow.
So I want everybody listening and watching to get ready for that and give yourself extra time when you go vote, because all of our judicial seats, the judges, are going to be on the ballot. But the one I want everybody to really focus on is Louisville's mayoral race. And I am so honored to be the campaign chairwoman to elect Craig Greenberg, our next mayor. First step, we've got to get Craig Greenberg elected May 17th as a Democrat nominee, and then we'll roll on into the general. However, what was interesting, you all, Lacey mentioned that in 2016, I ran for successfully and was elected to District 4 Louisville Metro Council. I never had any interest ever in running for electoral politics, even though Lacey had been a twice elected state senator, did a great job with that. That was before we were married. We just celebrated 28 years of marriage, and we're
Congrats.
still on our honeymoon.
Marital
It's
bliss.
fabulous.
Absolutely.
And so I never had any interest in running for office. Some folks may remember I spent about 30 years in between fundraising with Metro United Way and then Fund for the Arts.
Fund for the Arts, yeah.
And I was president and CEO at Fund for the Arts before I rewired from that in 2014. And we were having a great time. And then we came home from being out of town in December of 2015. We got back home. You can't make this stuff up. And I had a whole stack of paper newspapers. I'm one of those few people that still reads the paper edition of the Courier Journal. And I was catching up on the articles, and there was an article in the newspaper, I think it was January 9th of 2016, and David Tandy, who had been our Metro Council president and done a really good job, great leader, attorney, ready to keep moving in his political career, held a press conference or sent out a statement that he wasn't going to run for election. We only had until January 21st for the filing deadline that year.
Oh, wow.
District 4 is a critical Metro Council
It's
seat.
downtown, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All 26 Metro Council seats are very important, and they're unique in their own ways. District 4, though, is the entire downtown area, most of the Russell neighborhood, a little bit of Portland, a little bit of California. It's all of Phoenix Hill, almost all of Butchertown, every bit of Shelby Park, every bit of Smoketown, little bit of the Highlands. You name it, little bit of Snitzelburg, Paristown Point, all of it. I was born in Paristown Point. Thank y'all very much at the Kentucky Baptist Hospital.
It's had a little bit of a rebirth here lately.
Right.
Resurgence.
So when you think about that district and then the entire central business district, it literally is the economic driver for the entire Commonwealth of Kentucky, which is what got mine and Lacey's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went around, we thought about who could we get to run for that, who would represent that district very well, which it was 73% black and had always been represented by a black person here
Black
from
male.
Louisville. And so we thought, we'll find someone. So we did. We identified someone. We're going to leave this person nameless because I don't want to call them out on the air. We didn't get
Why
their
not?
permission today because we love this person.
Well,
We're not even going to reveal how they identify. Leave it at that, Lacey. And so they agreed to do it. And we show up with a notary and Lacey and me as witnesses and the forms to fill out. We put them in front of them. We're going to be the two witnesses. And this person looks at me and pushes the papers back across the table and says, I can't do this.
Oh, wow.
And I
Oh.
said, what? What do you mean you can't?
can't
Sure
do
you
it.
can.
Yeah.
And the person says, no. I said, but it's going to be so much fun. Lacey's experience, he can really do the fundraising. I'll help you out in the neighborhoods and the door knockings. And they looked right at me and said, you and I both know God made you to do this kind of work.
Wow.
You love this work. You are the people's choice. You run. You sign on the candidate line.
And that's how it happened.
I signed on the candidate line. Lacey and someone else signed on the witness line. And then we walked out and got in the car and
Shook our heads.
the
Said, "What have
phone
we done?"
rang.
He said, what are we
What have we
doing?
done?
I know. And then my phone rang and it was Clarence Yancey. And he said, okay, I need you to get up to the Jefferson County Democratic headquarters at 5:30 tonight. I'm introducing you as the Metro Council 4 candidate. And I said, what? I got to give a speech? He said, show up. You'll do great.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing
So-
because
Oh my gosh.
although he introduced her, he did say this in introducing her. He said, you see that guy over there sitting down with white hair? He said, now he and I have been friends for 50 years, and he looks really white. Now, Clarence is black. And he said, but I want to tell you something. His heart is as black as mine.
You know, and that kind of, and that's right. I remember
He
that.
did say that.
And that set the whole stage for the campaign. And it really brings us to current events
Yeah.
today that's really interesting. It's a conversation that I don't think, in my opinion, our nation, our country has not had fully. We're just beginning to have that conversation. But right as I turned those papers in and hit the clock over at the Board of Elections, I think it was 4:45. Remember we had to be over at the Jefferson
At 5
County
o'clock.
Democratic headquarters at 5:30.
Well,
And so I walked out of the Board of Elections, and Lacey was in the car. And as I'm walking toward the car, my phone rings again. And I look at my phone, and it's Philip Bailey. I know who that is and was at the time, a journalist for the Courier Journal. And I'm thinking, he must be in this parking lot. Why would he be calling me now? And so I said, Lacey, what do I do? He says, answer your phone.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what am I going to say? He said, just answer the questions. So you all, it was in that moment that was a real defining moment in my life because I sat in the car and I said, hey, Philip, how you doing, buddy? And he said, I'm doing fine. So rumor has it you filed papers to run for Metro Council District 4. And I said, Philip, are you around here somewhere? Are you watching me? He said, I got people everywhere. And we laughed. And he said, okay, I got a question for you. And I want to share it with you all today and tell you how I answered it and to see what you
Absolutely.
guys think about it. And he said, I just want to ask you something. He said, explain to me what it is that you as a white woman coming from business thinks that you have to offer, and how can you even begin to relate to the people in District 4, most of whom are black. And I said, Philip, that's a great question. If you want to make this race about race, I welcome that, because I'll take that any day. We need to have a conversation about it. I don't know so much about what me as a white woman has to offer, but I do know this. I said, I know blackness is three things. I said, Philip, blackness is black in color, and I am not. Blackness is black in culture, and I was not raised black in culture. But then there's black consciousness. That I am. I'm very conscious of my surroundings. So let's go. What's the next question? And he said, wow, I wasn't ready for that.
Nice
Wow.
answer.
Yeah.
I said, let's go.
Well,
So I'm honored to be here to talk about these things with you all.
I
That's
think
right.
it's
So we know the
fantastic.
result. So yeah.
Well, and one thing that I think is really interesting, when I told Chad that I had met you and that I was trying to get you to sit down with us, I think I said, you know, she was on the Metro Council forever. But when I did my background research, you were not on the Metro Council forever. You were like 4 years, right?
Right. This is a reputation that I have, y'all. And the more we talk and more familiar we get with each other, my Kentucky fight and holler roots come out, and my twang really goes. Reminds me of the time in my life when I did work in human resources at Blue Cross and Blue Shield. I think that was like in 1985, 86. And when I left there back then, okay, they threw this party that was like a retirement party, and I'd only been there 18 months. And they said, it just seems like you've been here forever. So, Lacey, I don't know if that's because I talk too much. I like to say I have a lot to say and I can talk really fast. But yes, I was on Metro Council for one term for 4 years, and I did not seek re-election because I felt it was very important to step over so someone else could step in or step up. I think that's one of the messages I want to communicate with all of our listeners and viewers today is, as you go about life and things you're doing, don't get complacent. Don't think you're going to stay somewhere forever. Just when you're at the top of your game and you're really sailing, I want you to think about, am I as good as I think I am? Can I step into the abyss, step over, let somebody else step up, and I'll do something different? Lacey helped me all 4 years. All the legislation that I sponsored, I could have never done it without the help of this brilliant lawyer and this brilliant negotiator side by side every day with me. He's a wonderful reader. He comprehends very well. I don't. I'd come home with 100 pages every other day, and I'd say, Lacey,
I got a job for you.
Summarize it. Well, the point she's making, and I don't think I did as much as she's saying I did, but one thing that I did do that I'm very proud of, and I think has community-wide appeal, is this. When Breonna Taylor was murdered, which really is a blotch on our community, I have to say that, as a Louisvillian, Barbara wrote a letter to the community and said, this is not right. Here are some things that need to be done. And I read that letter, and I said, you know, you're absolutely right. But we need to do more than just communicate what are really heartfelt feelings. And she said, well, what? I said, we need to have an ordinance. We need to draft an ordinance that bans no-knock warrants and requires the police to wear their body cameras in incidents like this and turn them on.
That's right.
I mean, think of that. Wear a body camera, turn it on, and then preserve the film so that you can be transparent with the Louisville public about what has happened. And so we worked on that ordinance, and Barbara was the only one who was for it at the beginning. We had 25 to 1 is what we had at the beginning. And then she called up Jessica Green, and I'm telling things that she could tell just as well as I, even though I was there. And Jessica Green said, girl, I think you're out of your mind, but if you're going to do this, I'll be with you. So the two of them sat there, and I'll never forget this. They took the list of Metro Council members and divided them up and said, okay, you take this half, I'll take that half. They started lobbying them, and how many days was it? Fewer than 3 weeks.
well, what happened was, and then to put it in perspective for everyone, Jessica Green is now Judge Jessica Green.
Right.
Thank you
Right.
very much for that appointment. She was at that time Metro Councilwoman Jessica Green representing District 1, and she was, more importantly, the chairwoman of the Public Safety Committee. So out of respect for her, I needed to call her and ask her to co-sponsor this ordinance with me. Now, I had been contacted by a sister of Keturah Herron. Keturah Herron is a very key player in this whole ordinance development story that Lacey's unfolding, because this is our newly elected state representative, Keturah Herron. But back then, in May of 2020, she was working on policy as an analyst with the ACLU Kentucky chapter. She had talked with Jessica about the need for something to be done. So we were noodling around all kind of things. But what happened was on May 20th, well, actually, Mother's Day, Sunday, May 10th, was the first that I had heard and paid attention that Breonna Taylor had been killed in her home. Now, she had been killed on March 13th. There had been one or two articles about it, but it hadn't become an everyday conversation in Louisville. And my stepson called me and asked me if I knew what the freight train was that was headed for Louisville from New York and Chicago. And I said,
It played off of the George Floyd that hit the national news,
Yeah.
and then it
Right.
started rolling.
And I did not know. And so then, of course, that is what happened. So that was that Sunday, May 10th. And then it was on May 20th that my letter to the community went out, and I just put it out like an elected official does, a public statement, sent it to the media. Well, they picked it up, and if anybody wants to read the letter, I think you can find it online at WHAS. They printed the whole thing on their online version. But it was, how do you make a law, amend a law, debate a law, and get a unanimous vote, 26-0, in 22 days? We did it. And there's a whole, we'll come back on another
That's
show.
a whole-
Really ought to ask Keturah
that's a
Herron
big
to
story.
come
Yeah.
and talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it's fascinating because then it was picked up around the country once it passed. And other cities, not that many, not enough, but some other cities have adopted similar ordinances. And it got a great deal of attention. Barbara was interviewed by 3 or 4 National Basketball Association stars on a television.
Well, what
program.
happened was, you all may remember the NBA playoffs were
They were
being,
bubbled.
They were
Oh,
bubbled
right,
in
that's right.
They were
Orlando.
bubbled.
And Kari Arnold is a young man who manages, you may be familiar with him. He is in charge of he's the senior editor for all of their online communications and their website. He called me one day leading up to the Western playoffs and introduced himself, and he said, we want to talk to you about the no-knock warrant ban that you all achieved in Louisville, and like to interview you and do a story. Well, to shorten this part of our conversation today, he got so on fire, went to the other editors. It ended up being, I think, a 4-part series that ran for a number of weeks. And then he called me and asked if I would go on live from my dining room, because it was pandemic.
It was obviously
Yep.
pandemic.
And if I would be allowed to be put into the set on TNT in Atlanta with Charles Barkley and Isaiah Thomas, Grant
Isaiah
Hill,
Wow, Kenny
and
Smith.
some others. Well, Barkley ended up not coming on the air,
Oh,
but there
that's
were 3
terrible.
others who interviewed me for 15 minutes right before the playoffs started. And we talked all about a lot of things that night. But you know what's important? Here we are in Louisville, Kentucky. So if you talk about all around Louisville, what's happening, what's going on today, well, everything is everything. You know, why did I ever end up in elected office? And with the help that I get from Lacey and the people and connections we had and that experience with that ordinance, and then now assisting Greenberg and getting elected our next mayor, it's all about public safety. It's all about police accountability, transparency, and trust. It's all about community engagement. And this is everybody's community. And I think everybody has a responsibility to participate in the community.
I agree with you, and you're talking about this is our community, and you were talking about a little bit ago them asking questions about race when you jumped into the race for
District
the
4.
council, and it's time to stop othering everybody all the time. That's it.
Exactly. So I turned 65 this last January, and I do love to tell everybody how old I am. I'm a rare woman.
I don't share that with them.
I called it, this year is my KFC birthday, and the reason is Colonel Sanders was 65 years old. when he founded KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And that headquarters, y'all go with me. Anybody that's listening or watching right now, I don't know. Can we tell them where we are located?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if they had a secret
really close
hideout
to
here.
it.
Yeah.
I didn't know if this was your all secret tree house or something.
That's at a different
So
place.
we're located right here at 1300 Gardner Lane. And when I pulled up, I thought, oh my gosh, that's the building that is now built on top of the little open field, the baseball field that I used to play in, because I grew up in the house about 150 yards from where we are. And then Colonel Sanders, KFC headquarters, was down in the big White House, where now is Yum Brands
Yep.
Right.
headquarters. And there's a pond down there that you can see. Well, we called that All Roads Lead Back to Insurance. When I grew up, we called that the insurance pond, because there was an insurance company on the hill. And so if he could start KFC at 65 years of age, what could I do at 65? Anything I choose to do. And I tell people all the time, don't other people, as you were saying, Chad. You have to look in the mirror. Whenever you want to point the finger or complain or blame or explain, just look in the mirror and say, what did you do today, and what are you doing to be part of the solution? And we need common sense solutions to complex challenges. It's that simple.
Yep. I'm a career changer at 40 years old, actually.
All right.
So I get that, like you're not stuck in what you're doing
At any point in time.
Yeah.
Oh.
Very few people are. Go ahead and, be in charge of your life.
Barbara, kind of question, because I've always been just enamored with politics as well. One, with 4 years, did you enjoy it? Was it a wonderful experience? I mean,
Yeah, I loved it.
That's great.
I loved every bit of the being on Louisville Metro Council, and I took it so seriously. And I think a lot of people really enjoy it. They don't express that as much, but I have something else I live by. We have lots of Barbara-isms. If you don't like what you're doing, please stop doing it.
Yeah.
And if you're unhappy doing what you're doing, please stop doing it, because you're going to very quickly make everybody else around
Great
you
point.
not like you being there and not enjoy being with you. So, we can't choose the things that happen in life, but we sure can choose our attitude, and we're going to choose our actions and what we do about it. So I've loved everything I've ever done.
Well,
I've had lots of interesting jobs. I mean, it's crazy to think about my very first job. It's the same thing Lacey and I are doing right now. Lacey and I are going out and knocking on doors. We try to do it 6 days a week, because it's campaign season.
Yes, it is.
May 17th is the primary, and I think it's the most important election our city's had in many years, because our current mayor has completed his 3 terms in office, and we're going to elect a new mayor. And the mayor is really the CEO of the city and has to run like a major operation. So when we go out and knock on doors, and Neal, that's how we met you, knocking on doors. You know why I'm such a natural at that? My very first job, I was 13 years old, living over here in this little house I mentioned, and I was receiving a paycheck for selling Fuller brush door to door. And I learned how to do that, and I loved it.
And it carried over into a full career.
That must have been before child labor laws or something, now that I think about it.
Well, you can, I think Barbara's experience is sort of one side of another coin from other people's experiences. She started out with Fuller brushes, and she really liked it. My first real job, I got a job through my cousin working at International Harvester. Remember them when they were here?
I do.
And I worked on a milling machine, and I milled these tractor manifolds. And all day long, I would stand there with these tractor manifolds and handle these things, and I'd get grease all over my hands, and I'd spend about an hour at the end of each day trying to get the grease out of my hands, which I never could do. And so I finally, at the end of 1 week, I quit because I thought, although I was this was back, I was making about $150 a week.
Yeah.
And this was back in like 1960. So, that was a lot of money. But, it was boring, and I knew I didn't want to do it. And so I got an interview down at the Louisville Times newspaper, and I went down there, and I was fortunate to be able to persuade Norman Isaacs, who was the managing editor, to hire me as a reporter. And so I worked as a reporter and went all around the city doing all kind of writing obituaries and writing on the police beat and so forth. And I really enjoyed that. So Barbara's done what she liked to do her whole life, but I had an experience there and one other experience working on a farm, which proved to me I don't ever want to do manual labor.
Right.
If I'm going to do anything, it's going to have to be with my brain because I don't like that stuff.
You learned that early.
I learned it very, very early. I sure did.
You know what I think is really interesting is people listen and hear Lacey's stories and hear that. And earlier he mentioned going to Hamlin and then to Princeton School of International and Public Affairs and then to Harvard Law School. That wasn't his destiny, so he thought when he was real little. His father had a second-grade education.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and his father's real name was Lacey Katuski, and he couldn't even spell his real last name.
Wow.
And his father had been in prison most of Lacey's life, and the third time he came out of prison, he picks up Lacey's mother, and that they do what they do. They go load up with sugar in the trunk because they were producing libations.
This was back during Prohibition.
During
Gotcha.
Prohibition,
Very
and
good.
so they were
Yeah.
producing things to drink in the Al Capone hierarchy. And his father had been in Joliet
Wow.
prison.
Yeah.
And so when they got pulled over because it was a low-riding vehicle with the sugar in the back, that the police knew the sign. They asked the guy his name. He said Lacey Katuski, and they said, "How do you spell that?" And he didn't know how to spell it, and back to prison he goes. You can't make it up. So then Lacey must have started picking up on that. Another message I want to share with everybody, those of you who have small children or thinking about having children or grandchildren, these little ones, as little as 2, 3, 4, and 5, they pick up on everything we do and say.
Yes, it did.
And Lacey started picking up on that. And he was at Western Junior High that he mentioned. That's located at 22nd in Maine right now, a JCPS school. And a teacher there saw this kid getting in all kind of trouble. He was about 12. And she asked if she could take you to a Louisville orchestra concert. And that teacher was the violist, the principal violist of the Louisville Orchestra, Virginia Schneider. Tell them what happened that day, Lacey.
Well, I mean, that's right. I mean, of course, we grew up down there, and we were really, we're not as poor as some people, but I can tell you this: we didn't have any air conditioning, and we lived with my mother and my grandfather and my grandmother and my grandfather's girlfriend, who had 2 daughters, and we all lived in a little house, and all the kids slept on the floor in pallets. So we didn't really have, and no air conditioning. The Iceman came twice a week and put ice in the ice box, and so. But the woman, Virginia Schneider, started taking me to rehearsals, and introduced me to a world that was totally alien to me. I'd never seen anything like this, where this guy comes in and these people were up there with these shiny instruments making all this noise, and I thought, God, this can't be music. And this guy comes in with this stick and stands up in front of them and raises his arms up, and everything stops, and then this beautiful music comes out of all these instruments, and I'm thinking,
It's amazing.
man, where have I been? So that kind of led me down the road to doing more reading, and eventually caused my interest to change from getting into trouble with my buddy Marvin Scott, who died in prison, and some others down there in West Louisville. That even as it is now, it was a pretty rough area.
And people say the little things make a difference. And we had touched on my role as president and CEO at the Fund for the Arts, and Lacey's personal story of how the arts impacted him as a little boy and carried with him until today, to this very day. It's arguable because of that experience, getting to see that in live time, real time, caused him an interest in wanting to go to the Western Library then and go there and get books in a wagon every week, and then the rest is history with what he's done with his career.
It took a teacher.
It's a
made her reach
teacher.
out.
The teacher made all the difference, and I don't think people realize this. And it's what George Fisher, the current mayor's father, told me one time. He said, Lacey, the only way we can solve a lot of the issues we've got here, because they're so big, is that he said, if people like you and me, white people who have some affluence, we need to adopt a little kid, not legally adopt him, but de facto adopt a little kid that's 2 or 3 years old and sort of follow them along and help them along the way when we can. And it doesn't take a lot, because Virginia Snyder proved that to me. I mean, she didn't adopt me, but she would say, Lacey, do you know what this word means? And she'd have a word on a card, and I'd have no idea. And in her room, I'll never forget this. She had a big sign up across the top, and it said, if you expect to rate, don't expect to rate. And I thought, I don't understand what that means.
Did you say expectorate?
Yes. If you expect to rate, all those words were up there. And then there was one word, then don't expect to rate. The one
mean
word.
spit?
And I'm thinking, this makes no sense. And so finally I asked her, I said, Snyder, I said, those are all separate words, but this word is all run together. And she said, well, that's just one word. And I said, well, what does it mean? She picked up a dictionary and said, look it up.
Look it up.
So I looked it up, and I realized why it was up there like that. And so it was that small kind of thing that ended up making a big difference as I went down the road, with my dad who left, my dad Katusky. I told him one time, I said, Dad, if you'd not changed your name to Smith, if I'd been Lacey Katusky, I could have been an All-American at Notre Dame. But Smith, that's kind of a wimpy name. So anyway, but...
Well, I have a background in the arts myself.
You do? What is that?
Well, I have a bachelor's of fine arts in painting. Oh. And then I was an art teacher for a while, for several years.
Oh, wonderful. Did you in the visual arts?
Yes.
In JCPS? Or?
Well, in Bullitt County for 12 years, JCPS for 3.
Wow.
So you're familiar with, or are you familiar with the children's fine art classes?
The free art classes, yeah.
Yeah, and there were children's free art classes forever until about 2011 or 2012, and we decided we ought to call them children's fine art classes. We changed it from CFAC to CFAC because some children could afford to pay, and it helped with the revenue stream as we were seeking funding for all of the arts. But you're right.
I was a teacher for that program.
You were?
Yeah, I was.
Oh my gosh, that's
that
phenomenal. Because
Yeah.
the world-renowned local sculptor, Ed Hamilton.
Yes.
He was a student of Jefferson County Public Schools and took those classes. And on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., when President Bill Clinton was president of the United States, Ed Hamilton was commissioned to do the first African-American Civil War monument. And so that monument was placed there. But when Ed Hamilton was called and asked about the date to unveil that monument, he said to the president's staff, I can be there on that date, but I want the West Louisville Boys Choir to accompany me.
I remember that story.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And what's the whole point of that is a little thing makes a big difference. Ed Hamilton knew then that those 31 young men, ages 8 to 18, living in Portland and Russell and Shawnee neighborhoods, he knew their lives would change forever, not by what someone would give them or do whilst they were there, but by the mere fact that they got to go there and be a part of that.
Their
that
world
is
got
so
bigger.
Their world got bigger.
Got bigger.
Their world, because the whole world watched that unveiling.
Uh-huh.
And that was when they called and asked for the West Louisville Boys Choir right here out of Louisville, Kentucky, to go tour in Europe. And that's a whole phenomenal story that we don't have time for today. But that happened 20-something years ago. And Lacey and I were very involved with those children back then. The baby was 8 years old at the time. That young man is 30 years old today and has his own family and is doing extremely well. And then I can't leave a podcast or a radio or TV show of any kind without ever saying something about what about the time when the police officer had a positive interaction with what turned out to be the most famous name and face on planet Earth.
Muhammad Ali.
You got it. I was just looking in my Old Louisville, New Louisville pictorial book today, and I was looking at the pictures of the Columbia Gym, which I had not seen a couple of those photos, and it made me remember that was where Cassius Clay, at 12 years of age, who had gone inside to the Columbia Gym, which is now Spalding University over on 4th Street. He had gone inside and came out and his bike was stolen. Remember? Do y'all know?
I don't know the whole story.
Oh my gosh. All right. Do we have time for a quick one?
Absolutely, we
All
do.
right. So what happened was, it's called the red bike moment. He had a brand new red Schwinn bike that his parents, who worked so hard for any extra money they could get, just like most parents do. And he was proud of that bike, and he was with his cousin. They come out, and his bike had gotten stolen. He was so mad. They contacted the police to do a police report, and he's going through it. In that motion and that cadence in which he talks, he was going to whoop them. And Officer Joe Martin was the one that told the story first. And he said, that young Cassius Clay was saying, I'm going to find who took my bike. I'm going to whoop him. I'm going to whoop him. I'm going to whoop him good. And Joe Martin said, he looked at the young man and said, what makes you think you can whoop him? He said, I know I can. He said, you're going to have to get in better shape than you're in right now. You meet me in that gym right there tomorrow morning. Because he taught boxing.
Wow.
He said, and I will show you a thing or two before you go whoop somebody. Everybody knows Officer Joe Martin was not going to send him off to beat somebody else. He knew if he got him in there and he started teaching him principles of life and about giving and so forth, that he wouldn't go beat someone up. And so then the rest is history, because he learned how to move in the ring and so forth from Officer Martin. But the man that never gets talked about is Fred Stoner.
Don't know.
No one ever heard Fred Stoner's name to speak of outside of the Smoketown area until Muhammad Ali passed away. And when he passed away, there was messages coming in from Chicago. I was on the board of directors of the Ali Center at the time of the passing. And everybody was wanting to ask about Fred Stoner. Fred Stoner was the man that Muhammad Ali always credited for teaching him how to dance. And it's the footwork. It's the footwork. It's not just the bobbing and the weaving. And so if you want to sum up his life story, I could give it to you in a little rhyme in honor.
I like to hear that.
In honor of young Cassius Clay and Muhammad Ali. Louisville Lip, as they like to say. Confidence, conviction, dedication, and giving, respect and spirituality. That's the life he was living. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. He's the greatest of all time. He's Muhammad Ali. He was just a young boy from Kentucky when crime became his destiny. See, someone stole his bike and planted a seed because he became a fighter with his will to succeed. He went on to the Olympics and returned with gold to show it to his people for all to behold. He went on to be champion of the heavyweights, beat a man called Liston. It was truly fate. He predicted 8 rounds. It was only 7, and his soul was etched forever in heaven. Still they called him Cassius Clay, a name they gave his family back when there were slaves. But once his soul was truly free, that's when he declared, I'm Muhammad Ali. Confidence, conviction, dedication, and giving, respect and spirituality. That's the life Ali was living. Fear not. Love one another. Muhammad Ali.
That is awesome.
That's amazing. I like that. That's awesome.
Okay, we got to give credit to C.J. Vanston, the songwriter that Lonnie Ali commissioned to write that. There are many stanzas to that, and it was done to live music, the first humanitarian award after Ali's passing, and they brought in professional musicians and professional rap artists to do this, and they thought it would be fun if they stuck me in the middle of them.
With no training.
With no training.
Right.
So
But she
I can't do it in the cadence that the others do it, but at least I can
You
get
did
it.
great.
Yeah.
I can get that
I'll tell you,
far.
that museum is first class.
Isn't that
Yes,
great?
it is.
It's still a hidden jewel in the downtown that
is.
a lot of people don't. I don't say they don't know about it, but I bet a lot of people haven't been there. It's an amazing
Well,
facility.
to your point, what is amazing to me, and maybe I would be like this in another city, but there'll be people walking down the street. They have these little bats in their hand from Hilliard and Badsby, and I'll see them and I'll acknowledge them, and they'll say, is there any other place around here to go that we might be interesting? And I'm thinking, I said, yeah, about 200 feet down the street is the Muhammad Ali Museum. Really? Yeah, just walk right down 7th Street here,
Yeah.
and you can walk right in. But because it's not on Main Street, it's a little bit off, and that makes a big difference. Now, the Science Museum gets a lot of play up there. KMAC gets a lot of play. That's there. And then all these bourbon museums that have come
It's
along,
wild now, isn't it?
they're all there. And that makes a difference.
Barbara, let me ask you, especially with you helping, for the next mayoral race, Mayor Fisher is almost done. His 3 terms are almost over. What is the biggest, I want to say challenge, but what can Louisville as a city do? So many of our neighbors have I feel like they have leaped us by decades, and it almost feels hopeless to a degree to see in Nashville and Indy and what they've become. And I'm old enough to remember that all 3 cities were very similar, and it wasn't that long ago.
Right.
Can we
I
get
think
there?
if I could wave a magic wand and do one thing to help grow our city, grow in terms of population, grow in terms of economic development, grow in terms of our race relations and our more equitable community. And when I talk about equity, I'm talking about equitable in terms of health, education, transportation, housing. Did I say education? And so forth. There are a lot of areas. It's comprehensive. But the one thing we need to do, I think we need total tax reform, and we need it to come from Frankfort. And I want to encourage the people in Frankfort who are serving in those elected positions. I know you feel you're responding to your constituents, but keep in mind you're responding to the 4 million people all over the Commonwealth. Every vote you take in Frankfort is a vote for everyone who lives in Kentucky. Every vote Metro Council takes is a vote for everyone who lives in Louisville, not just your small council district. So I always kept that in mind. I want to encourage our legislators in Frankfort to have total tax reform. We need to have the local option sales tax has to be put in place. People didn't like that term. I believe in calling things what they are so the public knows what you're saying.
Right.
And they said, well, that's an acronym for LOST. And I said, it's local option sales tax. That's what it is. Let the local communities make the decision on whether or not they want to put something on the ballot to let the citizens vote if they want to have the tax or not. It doesn't become an automatic tax without the citizens' input. But don't let folks in Bowling Green and Paducah and Lexington and Capito and Covington make decisions for Louisville. Those of us in Louisville should not be making decisions for those folks that live in other parts of Kentucky. So I do think that's very important. So they tried to rename the local option sales tax and call it local, LIFT. Local investment for transformation. That's what it was.
Which
No, what does
means
that mean?
nothing. It's a
So
hodgepodge
that would be the
of
first thing I
words.
would do to answer your specific question about how do you deal with confronting the
competition.
growth and competition in Indianapolis and Nashville. I will say this: we all have to wake up every day believing in ourselves and keep believing in ourselves, because you see, there really is hope on the horizon. There really is, and it goes back to where we started this conversation. If you want to complain or blame or explain or
Look in the
point the
mirror.
finger or wish it coulda, shoulda, woulda, that doesn't get us anywhere. Go out and do something really positive today. And then the second thing that's heavy on my mind, what can we really do as a city and a community to start bridging our community? We've been through a lot. We've been through a lot in the last 2 years, you all. And we've been through more in Louisville, I think, than most, if not all, other cities across the nation. And because there's been so much focus on us, I think we start correcting our problems the same way societies before us, people created the problem. And I'm talking about housing. If you study the history of housing and you study the history of redlining in Louisville, Kentucky, you will see that in the early 1900s and 1930s and 40s and 50s and so forth, it was a very sophisticated, well thought out, strategic plan to keep black people and white people separated, and it was done through housing. Banks wouldn't lend to certain people. White people could live on these streets. Black people had to live on others. You couldn't buy or sell if it wasn't in the street where you were supposed to be. So my point is, then let's look at housing. So we have 72,000 housing units short just in Jefferson County of what we need to have all levels of the housing market available for the need. Of that 72,000 housing units that we're short in Jefferson County, 32,000 of those are called affordable housing units. Affordable housing is not a legal term. That is a marketing term.
Yeah.
And what that simply means is it just means that you have a house that your mortgage and utilities are not any more than 30% of your gross income.
Yep.
All right. You're in that real estate market. Keep me
I
honest
am.
here.
Well, so I actually recently shot a ad that's running on Facebook right now that I'm trying to kind of describe to the public what's going on with housing, because we've got a for sale crisis.
Right.
Because there's, 5 years ago it was a seller's market, but there's a third of the available listings right now. And it's kind of a perfect storm that has caused that. And one of the biggest factors is we never recovered from the 2007 and 8 crash.
Yeah.
Right.
And so many builders packed up and left. And there's a graph in that ad that shows the number of homes built by decade. And I think it was like 14 million, and it was creeping up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Then in the early 2000s, it drops off, and now it's like 0.25 million compared to 14 million.
So as I think about those 32,000 units that were short on this, what's affordable,
Mm-hmm.
we need to have those housing units committed and built all across the county.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the original question, how do you start bridging this community? I do not want these units built in just certain enclaves in certain areas. It's got to be spread all across the county. I am a proponent of mixed housing in all neighborhoods. I think it's very important. We need to learn to get comfortable living together, and all socioeconomic levels should be together so everybody can have all the same opportunities. I don't care where you live, what door you knock on. Back to the conversation, Lacey and I knocking doors every day. It doesn't matter what neighborhood we're in. Everybody that answers the door, they want the same thing, you all. They want to have a safe neighborhood. They want more and better jobs in their neighborhoods. They want to have good, solid, workable, effective public transportation.
Yep.
They want to have their doctor or health care clinic close by. They want their kids to be able to participate in after-school activities and go to schools in their neighborhoods. They want to have food, clothing, and shelter. They want to be able to buy a birthday cake and celebrate,
Yeah. And that's, you're not othering people. You're saying we are the same. And that's what I think we've lost sight of in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say, turn off your phone and go talk to your neighbor is one of the best things you can do for yourself.
Oh my gosh. When I was in office, and I didn't quit knocking doors.
Mm-hmm.
Neal, this won't surprise you. When I was the elected official, I just kept knocking on doors because I was just then going by and saying, hey, just stopping by to see you. How you doing? Do you need anything? I noticed your porch light hadn't been on a few nights when I've driven down the street. And people go, you're really coming here? And I said, yes. I said, actually, I'm on a Know Your Neighbor's Name campaign.
I like that.
So I had a little campaign. It's Know Your Neighbor's Name. And then turn your porch light on.
Because people don't.
Because,
They don't know
I
their
asked the chief of police and the mayor at the time, I said, if I could tell all the constituents, all the neighbors in my district to do one thing to help with safety. You know what they both told me? They both said, tell everybody to please turn their porch lights on, because people don't realize how hard it is for officers if they're on a foot chase or they're trying to see something. If it's dark, they're tripping over things. And I'm thinking that's easy to do. So turn those porch lights on, y'all. Know your neighbor's name on right and left and across the street and in your alley. And then pull the weeds. It's springtime. It's April 1st. The flowers are coming up. Pull the weeds, for goodness sakes. Take pride in your yard and pick up some trash.
As a former pizza delivery person, put your porch light on. It helps them too.
And you're right. The grass cutting has started. It looks like in the next week, if we get a decent day, I will be mowing the yard for the first time this year.
Yeah.
Man.
I don't envy you.
I think I'm going to take it back on from, it was something that we outsourced for a little bit, but our yard's so small, it just doesn't make sense.
I enjoy
now.
it, actually.
Wait a minute. Did he just say he's going to start cutting his own grass?
That's what he said.
All right.
That's
So
what he
now
said.
we're going to take a twist in the conversation. What kind of lawnmower are you going to use?
That's a good question, actually. Something inexpensive, because it's very small. So we may have to, I mean, I've even looked at some of the little non-motorized things and electric, and there's gas. And my last one I had was gas, but I think it's probably time to move on to one of the fancy electric types.
Exactly. Because Lacey and I live in an apartment at 7th and Main, so we don't have grass to cut. But whenever I lived in a home my whole adult life, or even as a child, I always loved cutting the grass and electric lawnmowers. So I had one of those hand push ones one time when I lived over on Everett Avenue, and it got rusty and didn't work. Get yourself an electric lawnmower. I want everybody listening or watching to consider electric lawnmower for the reason it is for our future. It is sustainability.
Yes.
You all, we need to use electric, and you won't run over the cord, and you're going to learn how to whip it back
may
over
not
your
run.
shoulder.
They've got new battery ones now, too.
And get
I've seen
yourself a
that.
battery-operated one, but not the gas-powered
battery.
lawnmowers. That's good. That's what you do for future generations.
That's right.
One thing at a time, right?
That's right.
Well, I say, what do you think we kind of wrap this up? We're closing in on an hour. It's almost
Oh, boy.
double on
It's gone
what
fast.
we usually do. This has been a lot of fun. So if people want to reach you guys, how do they find you?
Okay, well, folks, I have been told that if you Google my name, Barbara Sexton-Smith, and the phone number, those of you that are watching, you see this is my personal cell phone. I'm not going to say my personal cell phone because if you Google my name, it will call this phone. So you're going to have to work just a little bit for it. But then also you can find me at info at greenbergformayor.com.
Perfect.
And send an email in, info at greenbergformayor, spell it all the way out, .com. And